Halfway through the meeting, though, one of the coaches came to me and he said, "Hey, police officer outside says they think they've got someone with a gun." It may have been at the end. I can't remember if it was the middle or the end because it's been a few years. They said, "Someone's got a gun." So we lock the students that are inside. Something is happening. The sheriff is on it, though.
Today's youth need teachers, volunteers, and most of all, well, they need you. I'm Doug Edwards, and I'm going to be talking with real youth mentors and students to give you the knowledge you need to be the best youth worker possible. This is Youth Worker on Fire.
Oh, you're trying to bring me down and run me out of town. You're taking what you want, but you can't take my rhythm now. I'm walking to my own beat, just gonna be me. I'm not replicating nobody.
Stories sell. You're saying, well, Doug, what is this, a business course or something? Why do we need to know that? We're not selling anything. Well, yes, we are. We sell all the time. We negotiate all the time. We sell all the time. We don't like those words. We don't like to, unless you're a salesman or unless you're someone who loves negotiation, those are dirty words to you. But the phrase I learned in Youth for Christ, and it is a business phrase, says this: facts tell, stories sell. Facts tell, stories sell. I'm going to tell you about one of the biggest events that we put on in student ministry in my 29 years at one church, and really out of the 35 years that I was in student ministry full-time. It happened at the YMCA instead of our church for a purpose and for a reason. So we'll go back to that. But let's talk about the significance of mass impact. We don't really like to talk about mass impact. In fact, many times I'll hear people go, well, I'm going to disciple and grow it that way, one at a time. And that's true. You should do that. And you should do that significantly. We did that at the beginning of our ministry. Part of the reason you do that if you're starting a ministry is because you don't have anybody. You might have 3 or 4 or 5 people. Saddleback Church, one of the largest churches in the world, basically started off by sending letters out to Orange County and the surrounding counties. And Rick Warren says 60 people showed up. And he gave his last sermon, was the first sermon he ever preached to Saddleback Church, which was those 60 people. And he said it is very unusual for those people to stay long term at a church. But many of them came to know Jesus that day. They were there the entire time for his ministry. Some of them may still be there. Stories sell. And we want to know, is something real? You can give us statistics all day. I could tell you that we had 29 major events, one a year at the beginning of each school year, and that we affected a lot of students and good things happened. But those are just numbers, and those are just, we could add up all the numbers and come up with a good wow number for you. Let's talk about a singular event. First of all, Jesus, he had a couple of mass impact events near the end of his ministry. And his popularity had built up. He prepared for those things, and they had, everybody's heard about the feeding of the 5,000 men and the 4,000, another one feeding the 4,000 men. They always say men. And yet there was approximately, according to one article I was reading, probably with the women and children, there were probably approximately 10,000 at each one of those events. But they counting significantly men for different reasons that'll let you go into yourself. So here's Jesus. So how many people were there? Here's one thing that I said. I'm going to give you some facts, and they don't sell. You're going to go, yeah. Well, so what? Those are just numbers, and I don't like sales, and I don't like a negotiation. So this ain't going to mean much to me. But listen anyway. I'd heard this statement: if you want to reach 100 people, you reach out to 1,000. What you're going to do is you're going to get 1 to 10% of whatever you do. You're going to get 1 to 10%. You're going to end up getting those people locked into your product, locked into you, locked into your ministry, or at least coming a few more times. You may not have the capability or willingness to keep people. If you don't like a lot of people, you don't want to see a lot of people come to know Christ. I mean, you do in theory, but it's really, not your thing, so you're really going to probably keep sabotaging yourself and your ministry, then don't worry about this. You don't need to listen to this. I don't want to sell you on it. This is for those people who know in their heart and in their ministry that they want to reach as many people for Jesus as they can. They want to disciple them. They want to make them disciples. They don't want just a bunch of numbers, but those numbers, each number equals a person. So when you look in context of when we're reaching out for numbers, the one excuse we use for not doing that is, we're about individuals. We're about the names. We're not about the numbers. And people who are reaching out to a lot of people sometimes use the numbers as a crutch. It goes both ways. So Jesus is there, and it says sometime after this, or whatever that was, this is the 6th chapter of John, it says Jesus crossed to the far shore of the Sea of Galilee, that is the Sea of Tiberias, and a great crowd of people followed him because they saw the signs he had performed by healing the sick. Then Jesus went up on a mountainside and sat down with his disciples. The Jewish Passover festival was near. Verse 5 says, when Jesus looked up and saw a great crowd coming toward him, he said to Philip, where shall we buy bread for these people to eat? He asked this only to test him. He's only testing Philip, for he already had in mind what he was going to do. He, gave his sermon to the people, and at the end of all of this, he fed them. And he did this twice. And why was that significant, that he had this large crowd? Well, he's the Son of God. He can do it any way he wants, right? But usually when Jesus would do something, he only had 3 years. He was on a mission. He knew he had to get it done. He knew what the Father was asking him to do, and he prepared those things for you. So there's one story of also him discipling Philip, and you hear, different stories depending on which author, whether it was Luke or John, writing about that particular incident. So what about, and I'm not trying to sell that. We've talked about long-term care, follow through concern, all those elements, and there's just a few more elements there in student ministry. But the one that when people do it well, they might do the other one of follow through care not well. Some people doing big events is important. But when you do large mass impacts for the sake of the individual, there are times we came up with one person that came out of those large events, or two people that locked in for many, many years into our student ministry, and some are still friends to this day. There was a particular event, and we had been in ministry for a while. We came in from Youth for Christ learning how to do mass impact, which we'd only do 1 or 2 times a year, and mostly we would do it at the beginning of a year to kick off the school year like anything else, and we would feed as many people as possible. We would prepare for double of who we thought we would get, and we were taught to invite the school, either the schools that we were a part of. In my case, there were 2 high schools, and the next night there were 2 middle schools when we first learned all this. And then you would get their addresses and not at that time, but later, emails, cell phone numbers, that sort of thing. We would do that. I'd transfer that to the church that I ended up at after 6 years with Youth for Christ. We'd do some of the same things, and it made a big difference. In fact, here 40 plus years later, I'm at an event, and a youth FCA director named Bobby Rowe came up to me, and we were talking. I said, we have a mutual friend, Jim Baczynski. And he says, you're Doug. You're Doug Edwards. I said, well, yeah. He said, I was one of the kids during one of your burger bashes. You did those burger bashes. He said, and I brought a crew to start fights. And that was us. I said, I know, about you. I didn't know any names of who did that. And we'd prepare for that because Youth for Christ taught us to prepare for those things, because you have those student and team rivalries, and anything can happen. In order to secure parents, secure the community, secure your schools, we would hire police officers from the area or sheriffs, depending on if you're a county side or whatever, whoever was there for that district. We'd also have an EMT or an ambulance on site just in case. It wasn't that we're trying to cause trouble. We're trying to have a great time, but it was a mass impact. And so we'd done these for many years. one year I decided, you know what, we've really been doing this at our church and growing it there, but we have all these other youth workers, youth pastors. So now we're going to do it at the YMCA. That was the nicest, newest place in the area at the time. And I thought, you know what, and we cover 4 city areas and for middle school, 4 city for high school, and we always do 2 separate events. So this time it was at the YMCA. And the youth pastors in the area were even more excited because it was a neutral zone. It wasn't at our church. It was at the YMCA. It was a good idea. It was a God idea. And so we did that. We had record numbers. They stopped counting, they told me, because we'd have them sign quickly cards. Later, we'd start using computers and entering into computers after they'd fill out the cards. The cards were still easy to do, better to do individually instead of trying to get 700 or 800 people, to tell us all their information, type it in. So do you get everybody? No, you don't, but you get a lot of bodies through that you could follow up with and send newsletters and that sort of thing. So this is one of those events. So here we are at the YMCA. We got a great reputation with them. They've seen us do other things throughout the community. I'd probably been there 10 or 15 years already. We built up a good reputation. We do this event. The youth pastors are thrilled. The YMCA is thrilled. We have our sheriff there because I think it was county on that area. We had our EMT. Things are a little chaotic, a little bit different, a little hard to get the attention because there's that many. But we get it organized. They go through the food lines and different things like that. We gather them together, do a couple of events with a large crowd, and the people who took all the phone numbers and emails, things like that, told us later that they stopped counting at 700. We know there was more than 700, probably closer to 800 or more there, but they stopped counting at 700 because they just either ran out of cards or there was just too many students trying to get in, needing to get in. They just let them get in. Halfway through the meeting, though, one of the coaches came to me and he said, "Hey, police officer outside says they think they've got someone with a gun." It may have been at the end. I can't remember if it was the middle of the end because it's been a few years. They said, "Someone's got a gun." So we lock the students that are inside. We leave everybody else outside that's outside. We can't get them going in and out because something is happening. The sheriff is on it, though. And they come in, they go, "Listen, they got it contained." The sheriffs, because they had a couple of deputies there, had it contained and no problem. But it was a great event. Everyone was thrilled in spite of that issue. And one of the coaches, I said to a couple of the teachers, because I'd always invite the teachers and the coaches and the principals. I'd even invite the superintendent. I learned you go to the top, you invite the highest people possible because you want them to see that you have nothing to hide and that they have everything to gain by being a part of whatever you do, and that you're there not to harm them or hurt them in the relationship with the community, but you're there to enhance them and to help them. Let me tell you what, when people know that you love them and that you are there to defend them and not to offend them, they go to bat for you. So that night, I asked a couple of the teachers, coaches, said, "I'm so sorry for this." And they looked at me, they said, "What are you talking about? This was a great event. That was not a problem. That was one incident." They said, "We deal with this at school every day. You did good." I went, "Oh my goodness." I just forget the intensity of what the school system is like and the teachers and coaches and administrators and superintendents, what they deal with and all the sacrifices and risks they take in the name of education. And some of them in the name of education in Jesus. There's many of them that are believers. But that was one event. And you know what? But here's what happened. Here's the thing that went wrong after that great, great, massive event. And it's important that we always learn from our mistakes. I'd been having the event at our church, except for the very first one, which we called it basically Spirit Night. And there was a fight at that. And there's not fights at every one of them. There's only a couple out of all those years of all those events. And part of it was because we always tried to have a sheriff. Those things deter. And when you have an officer of the law there, and some people say, "Oh, it's going to scare the parents." No, the opposite is true. And I found this from one of my trainers, a leader, the opposite is true. When you have taken precautions, then people feel secure that you know what you're doing and that you are there to protect their children. So more students came and more parents allowed them to come. And the middle school events were always different than the high school events, and I kept them separate. You're risking middle schoolers' lives when you take them to a big mass impact high school event like that. It's not good for them. It's not safe for them. And some still do that. I don't believe in that. I believe Youth for Christ told us the separation of that is a great thing as well. I think you'll find that in Young Life and Crew, which used to be Campus Crusade for Christ, Fellowship of Christian Athletes, and the list goes on and on. But churches tend to do that because it makes it easier to do everything in one night. Even if you're doing it one night, divide them up. So what happened, though? What went wrong? It wasn't the event. It wasn't the way we did it. It wasn't where we had it. We should have kept having it there. I got insecure because I'm a volunteer with Fellowship of Christian Athletes, but I'm a full-time youth pastor. What do churches want to know? What did this do for us? Well, what it did for them was it made our church look like we were one of the most caring churches in the county, that we were willing to go to great lengths and put our money where our mouth was and to reach out to the community at large and to do good things for them and love them, and at the same time share Jesus Christ with them, but nobody's offended because they know, listen, these guys aren't here like some cult and trying to hurt families and hurt anything. They're enhancing everything we're doing and causing good things to come to our students and good attitudes to come out of them. But I got paranoid that year, even though I'd been there a while, because we may have ended up with 2 or 3 students. Maybe some of the other churches ended up with more from that event. And so I decided the next year to have it back at the church. And one of the larger youth student ministries in that area, a guy had been building a relationship. He says, okay, I get what you're about. And that was it. My relationship with that youth pastor was never the same. He couldn't trust me anymore, that I was not about myself. And because I had put it on that part of that size and that level of community level and with youth pastors, no matter how many times I invited them and introduced them and said all those things, it just didn't matter that to him, because I had offended him and made him think, which was true, I became about myself for that moment. I tried to change that for the rest of the years I was there. I did with newer people. And if you stay places long term, sometimes your mess ups can be changed because your youth pastors will change up. And that's what happened in this case. Other youth pastors came into his position because most churches, youth workers don't last that long. I was very glad that he was there for 4 or 5 years. I was just sorry that it messed up our relationship. So those things are important. Mass impact. So you say, Doug, well, if that's the case, then I don't need to be doing anything like that. That's not important. Well, Jesus would differ with you. There was a lot of things that appeared to go wrong in his ministry. There's a lot of things that the disciples questioned and went, why are you doing this? Now we're in trouble. You know, we're willing to fight for you. No, now I'm going to die. Well, wait a minute. This isn't adding up. And so there's things that happen, and then the religious leaders criticized Jesus, you know, and they were trying to find a way, but the masses, the 5,000 or 10,000, the 4,000 or around 10,000 again, those 2 events, the masses were there for him and believed in him, and the religious leaders were afraid to approach him. But anytime you do something that God wants you to do, you're going to have the temptation to do something else wrong. You're going to have the temptation to listen to critics who have never done the type of things that you're doing. And I had plenty of critics. Not only did I have people supporting me, but I also had people criticizing me. As long as you do God's work, you will have both things happen. Always try to renew those relationships that you've broken, though. I remember trying to renew that relationship. I think it was halfway healed before he left, but never the same. And I regret it to this day that I did not take the hit and just keep that event in the public eye to where it wasn't just at our church. And the excuse and the reason later in life was that I was tired. They'd built a great gym for us, and we were able to have that event at our gym. Not a bad idea. Still was a good thing to do. But after a while, fewer and fewer youth pastors came because it was our event and not the community event. And you say, well, Doug, that's what you're hired for. No, we were hired to save a community and to bring a community to Christ. And that means that you work with other churches, because the church is a church at large. The church is not each individual building, even though we may be paid by a certain organization. So remember this as you go to these as you do these mass impact meetings, or if you're afraid to, and understand this. I was very afraid. I was just scared out of my mind the first big events I did. I was not used to being the person putting these things on. The first time I collected money for a big trip for our students to go on, I thought all these insecure things come back. I'm going to lose the money, or we're going to end up having to cancel because we didn't collect everybody's money and all this thing. And none of that was true. The more you do for Christ that he leads you to do, the more you will do. Because the more you see his faithfulness, the more you will trust him that he is not going to only be faithful in the past, but he's going to be faithful in the present. And because he's faithful in the present, you've got a future. So remember this, the stories that I just told you are more important than the facts I told you. Those are the things that you're holding near and dear to you. Your stories matter to me. That's why we interview people, and that's why we hope you'll support us by subscribing and helping us out with Youth Worker on Fire. Tell other youth workers about this so that we can encourage them and help them to see our mistakes and our victories so that they can learn to do the best work possible as a youth worker, youth pastor, a volunteer. That's all we got for now. We'll see you next time on Youth Worker on Fire.
You've been listening to the Youth Worker on Fire podcast. If you like what you hear, please subscribe and tell your friends. Also, leave a comment and tell us what you think. Stay tuned for more informative episodes.